What did ancient civilizations believe was happening during an eclipse, and who, as far as we know, is the first person to figure out what was actually going on? So the first historical record of humans documenting an eclipse has been found in Ireland in the year 3340 BCE. Basically, they had these petroglyphs, right? They were like rock carvings. They had these overlapping circular rock carvings that appear to show an eclipse. And we've actually calculated that an eclipse would have occurred at that time, which is wild to me. I don't understand the science of it, how we can figure out exactly when eclipses would have always occurred. I know it's math, but wow. In 1200 BC, we find oracle bones documenting an eclipse in ancient China. Specifically, they have the really cryptic declaration, "The sun has been eaten." But what did these ancient civilizations think about the eclipse? Well, considering how they understood the world, they believed that the eclipse mostly was a bad omen, right? Because the sun is like the source of life, and the sun becoming blocked and the world going dark, would be interpreted as not a great thing. In ancient China, they interpreted this as celestial dragons who were eating and devouring the sun. According to Choctaw legend, they believed that it was a mischievous black squirrel that was gnawing on the sun. And in both of those instances, we have records that the people believed that they had to be really loud and bang drums to scare those creatures away. So I don't know, maybe that's what I'll be doing tomorrow when I watch the eclipse. It's just a big primal scream. That sounds kind of nice. In West Africa, the Tamari tribe interpreted this as representing feuds on Earth, right? The sun and the moon fighting each other for dominance. And so I guess they would have interpreted this based on kind of warring tribes or the need for peace or war. I don't know, depending on who's in charge. In multiple civilizations, we see evidence of human sacrifice being tied to the eclipse. Again, a sign of the gods of the universe being angry, right? Blotting out the sun, the entire source of life. And so the need to provide some sort of sacrifice. We see it in the Inca. We also see it in the earliest records that we have in Ireland. Immediately in front of those stone carvings from 3340 BCE, archaeologists had discovered the charred human remains of around 50 people. And so we believe that this was basically a Neolithic example of sacrifice. And again, it coincides, as far as we can tell, with the eclipse. Just to be clear, let's not make any sacrifices to the eclipse. Feel free to yell and bang a drum if you really want to. Follow for part 2, we'll talk about the astronomer, mathematician, and scientist who finally figured out what the heck was actually going on with an eclipse. Who was the first person to figure out what was actually happening during a solar eclipse? Well, that's impossible to know for sure, but based on the historical records we have, we believe it was the famous scientist, astronomer, mathematician, yada, 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 Aryabhata from India. He was born in South Asia, what is today India, in 476 CE, which, side note, is the exact year that Rome fell and basically collapsed, leading to the end of the Western Roman Empire. So I'm not saying it's Aryabhata's fault. I'm just saying that's an interesting coincidence. His only surviving work, Aryabhatiya, which is probably not what he called it, it's what later scholars called it, kind of naming it after him, includes the mathematical process to predict both solar and lunar eclipses. And it specifically describes what's happening, right? That the moon is getting between the sun and the earth and it's casting a shadow. And if you watched my last video, it's not mischievous black squirrels or celestial dragons or whatever eating the sun. Aryabhata's computational paradigm, which I totally know what that means, to predict eclipses was so accurate that he basically used Aryabhata's computations to predict an eclipse in August of 1765. And then he also used his and his own kind of experts and scientists. And he found that Aryabhata's predictions were short by 41 seconds, but his own were long by 68 seconds. So this ancient Indian astronomer mathematician was more accurate than an 18th century scientist. Aryabhata's work was also really influential for the golden age of the Islamic math and sciences, especially during the Abbasid Caliphate, where their leaders created this house of wisdom where they actively invited scholars from all over the known world. And one of their main jobs was to translate older works. For example, they translate Aristotle's works. They also translate Aryabhata's and other mathematical works as well. Al-Khwarizmi, one of the most important mathematicians and scientists of all time, he essentially invented algebra. He referenced Aryabhata's work all the time. And it's really important to note, too, that throughout Aryabhata's work, talking about kind of the celestial system, it's very clear that he's operating under the assumption that the Earth turns on its own axis. He's basically dispelling this idea that the stars in the sky move, that instead it's Earth moving, right? And so he's also one of the founding thinkers on this idea of relativity. He wrote, "In the same way that someone in a boat going forward sees an unmoving object going backward, so someone on the equator sees the unmoving stars going uniformly westward. The cause of rising and setting is that the sphere of the stars, together with the planets, turns due west at the equator, constantly pushed by the cosmic wind." And ironically, Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, 1500 years later, is actually only able to be confirmed during another eclipse. In 1919, Sir Arthur Eddington led an expedition to the island of Principe off the coast of West Africa to observe an eclipse in 1919. And something about the fact that the moon was obscuring the sun's glare, scientists were able to see that certain stars that were near the sun kind of appeared to be in the wrong position. Basically, their light was being warped by the sun's gravity. And this was what Einstein had predicted and was one of the things that helped confirm his general theory of relativity posited in 1915.